Welcome to Enrichment Today podcast, hosted by Dr. Amy Christine Blansit. This podcast covers topics to build stability and find tranquility in your life. Join us to discuss topics to improve your financial health, change your limiting beliefs, improve your wellness, and so much more, all to increase your self-sufficiency. If you like this podcast, make sure to follow the Enrichment Today podcast on Facebook and Instagram, and follow the Drew Lewis Foundation on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter. You can also check us out on our websites, enrichmenttoday.org and drewlewis.org. Now sit back, relax, and learn to break some crayons with us.
Welcome back. I'm Amy Blansit, Dr. Amy Blansit. I'm a professor at Missouri State in the kinesiology department, and I'm also a CEO and board chair of the Drew Lewis Foundation here at the Fairbanks. Today I have with me again Holly Melton. Holly, how would you like to describe yourself today?
Today, let's see. I'm still a mom of two. I am the founder and CEO of Your Financial Buddy, and I am also a yoga and fitness instructor. But more importantly, I'm here today to talk with Amy about her vision for the Fairbanks. And those are some great stories that we're going to discuss, find out all of the meat and potatoes behind the story, and just hear all the good things that she's started and created and her vision for the future.
Surprised you use meat and potatoes as a yoga health professional who probably doesn't eat either of those items, but I get what you mean.
Potatoes. I'm all about potatoes.
Yeah. So today we are going to talk about the Fairbanks a little bit. And so Holly's asked me many times, like, what and how in the world did this happen? Like, what is the Fairbanks? And so we also had some name confusion in the beginning because the Fairbanks is a monstrous building. If you've ever seen it, it is a beautiful old historic building. And we lovingly call it the Fairbanks, which a friend of Drew's named Jay, we were trying to figure out what to call it. So Jay actually gets credit for just simply saying, why are you trying to add in the community hub or all these other things? Just call it the Fairbanks, which was great. It was such a great name that when the Drew Lewis Foundation was trying to get their marketing out and their name, it was really overshadowed literally by this massive building and the name that it created. But aside from that, the Fairbanks started out as a school. It was named after Jonathan Fairbanks, who was a gentleman who came from Kansas City area to basically align the school systems. And this school was built in 1906. So I always love thinking about what it took to build it. We think about the electricity and the tools and the things that we have now to put together, 20,000 square feet of brick and mason. And so one, it's just an amazing building, but it operated as a school from 1906 to the 2006-2007 school year for about 100 years. So lots of kids. It's been fun having people show up from the neighborhood and from our community who went to school here, telling their stories about getting SWAT for swear words out on the playground. Or I love when they come because they're always telling all the all the naughty things they did in school and who the principal was. And so the principal's office was in a dungeon down in the basement, and so you did not want to go to the principal's office in this school. But it did. It operated for 100 years, and it had several additions. In the 50s, some cool historical stuff that actually resonate through this building is they added the lunches into the schools. And so for the first 50 years, the kids had about an hour lunch break, and they would run home, and they would eat, and then they would come back. I'm the type of kid that probably wouldn't have come back, take a nap in the park and not show up for the afternoon.
The way they change things.
Right. So bad idea. Probably should keep the kids on the school ground. So they did add a wing, and that was the cafeteria. And it also had a stage. So it really became everything for the school and the community, right? It's where you came to see those wonderful, second grade plays. How many of those did you?
Oh, yeah, I love those.
They're so cute.
Yeah.
So we called the cafegimatorium. Yeah, Janelle was the principal of the school when it closed, and I was lucky enough to get to meet with her and get to know her and learn about some of the quirks. So the cafegimatorium. So we still have food and church and all kinds of congregations that occur there. This weekend we even have the reptile group that come 3 times a year and have reptiles. We've only lost one so far. Luckily not in the building.
I was going to say there's a large iguana living downstairs now.
Yeah, luckily they lost it outside the building. So then in the 60s,
That's
they
what
added...
they told you.
Yeah, right? That's what I keep hearing. Yeah. So in the 60s, they added kindergarten to the school system, and the building had already expanded. And so they added a wing onto that to add in the kindergarten. And then in the 80s, the school system ended up getting funding as well and added a library. And so, yeah, 3 additions that they kind of added on to the main original 8 school room building. And so it served as 100 years. And then in, as I said, 2007, they closed the doors because they had done a renovation at another school that's not too far from here and blended the kids into one building. And then it sat vacant, and some investors thought they were going to raise it and build on the property. It's on 2.2 acres. And unfortunately, luckily for me, it didn't happen. Unfortunately for the building, though, it went through a lot of damage and ruin by sitting vacant.
Yeah, I can imagine. So, and you said there was even a fire in part of the building that you had to work with when you bought the building. So.
Yeah. At one point, some individuals had broken in and had built a fire in the basement in a plastic tub, like a wash bin, that I guess was a hand washing station. And so it ended up burning the floor. Luckily, they had added asbestos to the building to save the children from fire hazard. And the asbestos had not been removed, and it actually saved the building from being burnt down.
Wow.
So that was one of the things, too, about getting this building renovated is all the things that were fire retardant, like lead and asbestos, were all used for the safety of our children in the 50s and 60s, 40s, 50s, and 60s.
So you had to have all that removed?
Yes.
Oh, my gosh.
Yes.
Yeah, I want to hear about that at some point.
Yeah.
So that's the story behind obtaining the building. So what happened after you got the building?
Yeah, so, oh goodness. So again, I owned a home in this neighborhood, and I would drive by the building and seeing it being just destroyed. And my niece was finishing architect school, and so she started drafting ideas. Just what could the building become? And so first it was about saving this historic building. I mean, it's just a beautiful, this brick is amazing. But so, I steal this phrase from, there was someone who was doing an interview for one of the local stations and kind of made the slogan of what started out as saving a building has become saving a community. And this building again and the Drew Lewis Foundation have really been a part of how do we take buildings that otherwise would have been torn down. They were taxpayers' dollars. They have our history in them. Our children were raised in them. And how do we repurpose them instead of just tearing them down?
Right.
And so my niece and I started looking into all these ideas. Drew was going through treatment for cancer, so we had a lot of downtime when he was having treatments. And so we started researching what were other communities doing with repurposed buildings. Many of them had turned old schools into, or like old warehouses had become like flea markets. And so the whole thing behind it was how do you create sustainability by generating leasable space? And so in this neighborhood, I knew that the idea of some type of flea market or even standard office buildings would be a hard sale. Now, we're not too far from the legal district, so we do have, a lot of individuals that are coming to this area for legal needs based on having the courts and everything not too far down the street. And so, but I know enough lawyers that they were going to look at this building and be like, yeah, I'm not going to have an office, in that neighborhood at that time. So we really just started looking into other ideas. About that time, we are in a neighborhood that has some pretty significant businesses. So the world headquarters for the Assemblies of God are down the street. As I mentioned, we have a lot of the legal proceedings and the county seat just down the street. So I started reaching out to different organizations just to say, this is what we're doing. What interest do you have? What would that look like? How can we connect? And I ended up getting connected with an organization called Life 360 that's with the Assemblies of God. And they also had the idea of creating community centers that would, in essence, have a place to have spiritual connection. But how do we do this idea of cradle to career services? So multi-generational, having a safe space in a walkable distance. And so we'd already started kind of looking at that. The Springfield Community Gardens was also launching, and an individual who was pretty big in that development piece lived down the street and was like, hey, you have 2 acres. I bet you don't want to mow it. We could put a garden in there. So those types of things started coming together, and we've never really had to post that we were trying to rent. From the very beginning, we had a woman who was starting a wellness company that came in and rented out of one corner. We had Mindy, who you've met. Mindy actually she produces different things that she takes to flea markets. And so she used a corner. We had a guy who was writing ebooks. He used a corner. And so slowly, just community members were looking for a place. The E-Factory was getting launched. And so this idea of co-sharing really was what blended with me. So we had this community hub concept more on the religious aspect. And then I saw more of the entrepreneurial aspect. And we really started saying, okay, how do we shape these two?
The incubators, and then you were looking for tenants, right? You had
Correct.
to find tenants
that
would lease.
Yes.
So that your investors, or who you would hope would invest.
Oh, no one was investing. That was the other problem. Okay. I was hopeful that we would have investors and people would see the vision. But so I'd approached the city because there were CDBG, Community Development Block Grant Funds. But really to do those, you had to have a complete investment plan. So those funds, you can't just go in and say, hey, I need $200,000 of these funds if you don't have the other $1 million planned. So even though I had the phase 1 of the building, Drew and I had taken out a commercial loan, and we had gotten that section complete. We completed, unfortunately, after he had passed, but we put all that into motion while he was alive. And then moving into the next phases, we had to have all 25,000 square feet planned and funded, where the CDBG funds could only be one part of it. Great Southern was interested in funding, but also only a little bit of it. We'll do this first part and see how it goes. So I really didn't have access to much, and most people who I approached said, amazing idea, a great mission, but we just don't think it's possible. We don't think that neighborhood's not going to host it. People are going to want to go to the north side. It's kind of that forgotten area. Can't we just put a gate around it and pretend it doesn't exist? And so, I had a lot of people resisting the idea, even though they knew that it was needed.
Yeah, because we need to see everybody, right? The community is made up of every citizen in Springfield. It's not just 85% of the community. So what you've done is to bring a spotlight to this part of the city, and you're just broadening that spotlight and hopefully bringing more attention to what this foundation can do to improve lives around here. So tell me a little bit more about what does it take to save a 120-year-old burned out building? And, you talked a little bit about the funding behind how you attained some of the funding. You started out with a commercial loan. So how did it grow from there? And can we build on that part of it?
Yeah. So, right. So luckily, again, social capital. We're probably going to talk about that a lot in most of the sessions we talk about. So social capital is who you know and how wide your net is when you're asking for help. And so for me, I had someone who I'd gone to college with, who had moved into the commercial marketing section of Great Southern, and I put a bug in his ear that I had this idea. Would he even entertain the idea? So had he not known me, and had he not known that I have the drive and the passion and was going to figure out something one way or another, it would have never happened. So first, I will be the first to say, it took knowing the right people, in order to make this happen. And when, you mentioned when you are low income and you don't have that social capital, you don't have opportunity.
Right.
So it definitely was, an opportunity that was there because I had the opportunity to go to college. So anyway, Mark jumped on board and said, yeah, but again, we'll fund this amount, knowing that the building or the land itself was worth phase one. So they still were making a secure loan based on they could just assume the property, which, by the way, they had already assumed. So I was also doing them a favor by taking off their books a property that they had bad debt on from someone who had, So they had also at that point reassumed the property. We can go back. So I called the realtor who was responsible for this property because they had a big old sign out front and was chewing him out. And he said, you can call the bank because they actually are the ones who own it now. And so that's where, again, those two stories then fold where it was Mark. I was like, oh, I know him. I'm going to call him and talk with him about it. Yeah. So Great Southern got it. And we got the first part open. And that's what we talked about, how we opened our doors and thought if 10 people show up, amazing. Right. And instead 200 showed up. We said, okay, now it's time to continue moving on this. At that time, Habitat for Humanity was also looking at changing their model and focusing on one community. So they had come through the doors and we'd been working with them. And one of the best forms of flattery is to be copied. And so we're seeing other buildings in our community that saw, hey, the Fairbanks is possible, and there is this energy behind it. And so a church was saved, and that was converted into the Dream Center, and Habitat joined them, and they've been focusing on that neighborhood of looking at housing and community hubs. And so that was one where it was like, okay, we have to have more splash. Who else can we go to in the community? And so that's also about the time when Life 360 was developing into a more known entity in our community. And I was able to negotiate a lease with them for 5 years. And based on that 5-year lease, then negotiate with the bank for an extension on our loan. Okay. So honestly, for Great Southern in the beginning, they took a big risk. There was obviously some, leverage behind it. They could always repossess the property, but they did take a big risk with this idea. So they funded phase one, phase two. Then I realized we were at a standstill, that even though there was altruistic means coming from me, I had no interest in earning $1 million by flipping this property. I wanted to really invest in the community. We couldn't go any further without converting the ownership of the property from my real estate LLC into the nonprofit.
I see.
And so to make this happen, I gave up, the investment and the time and the energy I'd put into it that I potentially could have got out if we ever sold. But it was the right thing to do in order to truly save this building and create what was here. So we converted it over. I donated it to the nonprofit. And because of that donation and because of the leases we had in place, we then were noticed by others. And that's when, as a nonprofit, when other individuals could donate their time and their money and get credit for it, they were more likely to show up. And so that's when we ended up applying for several grants and being able to cobble together, honestly, an organization out of Tulsa. Ended up donating an organization that's an anonymous donor, gave us $300,000. And then we ended up also with CDBG funds and another extension with Great Southern on our loan. So it's cobbled together. We still have debt, and we're still looking at, capital campaigns in order to pay that down. But it took a lot of risk and it took a lot of passion to make it happen.
And you're not, at the time, it wasn't on any historical registry. You didn't have access to tax credits.
We tried. We actually had some organizations assist us that had done tax credits in the past. But when we put in our application, it was turned down because at that time, the understanding of what could be done, when we were using language like collective impact models, we were using the conversation about multiple tenants coming together to provide services and resources. That language wasn't quite mainstream in the nonprofit world yet. And so we got a lot of, we don't understand what you're doing. If your organization isn't providing all the programming, then this isn't a complete application. And so we were turned down because we were ahead of the curve. So now individuals that are applying, they're like, if you're not a collective impact model, do not apply. So we were just a bit ahead of the curve. We really did want to look at some of the historic tax options. It did also, though, mean we were going to have to raise a lot more capital because the exterior of the building has to be original. So the windows were going to be 3 times as expensive. And that in itself would be something that would make the building obsolete. Like, we just couldn't have done it.
Right.
So there was that balance of, we probably would have got the tax credit dollars, but it would have been a wash in simply by the time we restored the exterior facade and added the correct windows, all of those funds would have been gone.
So is it possible, are there any part of this that could be turned into an incubator? And then we're also looking at the idea of an Envision Center. So I know those are two different paths, but I did have that
they
question
can kind of
about
merge.
the incubator
Right.
idea, because I know for me, I was looking for business space, and
Yeah.
it's really hard to find
Right.
affordable office space.
Yes. Well, and that's how it honestly started, is the idea of being an incubator when we were over in what we call the library, because it was the original library. We did have these individuals that were renting a desk. And so it was $50 a week. You could just come in, you had free Wi-Fi, and you could sit at a desk. If you wanted, we had several separate offices. So we actually started out as, in essence, not the incubator in the sense we were offering business classes and resources from like the SBA, but instead it just simply was, you need Wi-Fi and you need a place that isn't your home to be. So we started that, and that honestly was my vision, is to provide a space where individuals who were interested in small businesses or owned a business out of their home would have a place to come and connect. I was also looking at starting up Solis Jolie, and so being at the E-Factory or being here where other people were also developing small businesses was so motivating. I was, it was so much more effective. Also, developing the Drew Lewis Foundation as a nonprofit. When I joined individuals that were also doing those things, it just was that energy that you needed to take those steps. So not opposed to it, except we'd have to build on, because we are leased, we are at full capacity, and if I had more space to rent, it would be used. And that's,
Even the
amazing.
principal's dungeon office?
The principal's dungeon office. So this neighborhood is called Grant Beach for a reason. There is a little creek that runs through it, and there used to be a beach. So when you live in this neighborhood, your basement is, you're going to have a sump pump in it, and it's going to leak. And so our basement is more for our bike shop and storage and things that, can withstand a little water. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Cool.
So, you mentioned the Envision Center, right? So, HUD, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, our government decided that they weren't communicating very well among the different departments when, especially, it came into social resources.
Shocking.
I know. So, what they looked at was, what if we create these central hubs in communities that are bringing together these different resources like housing, food, childcare, business development, right? Small business development, all these different resources that our tax dollars provide us. But if you don't know where to get them or how to get them, or you're having to go throughout your county or your city to access them, you're less likely to use the resource, or it's just time consuming. So they created this concept called the Envision Center. The Envision Centers focus on 4 things. Economic development, right? We want healthy, sustainable communities, and that means we have to have a good economy surrounding them. Educational advancement. So we have the Career Center and the Geek Foundation and those kinds of things. Our connection with the universities, Drury University and Missouri State. We also have students who are here from Evangel. And so that educational component needs to be there. Health and wellness, right? So we got to have healthy, happy community members in order to have a good community. And then the development of character and leadership. So you have to fill out an application that shows how your organization or collectively organizations come together in a hub. in order to provide those resources to an individual who walks in the doors. And so it was amazing. So we actually had gone to, as a representative of Missouri State in the relationship with developing the Northwest Project, myself and our Deputy Provost, Chris Craig, had gone to DC to look at what funding was available. And when we went in and met with HUD, they sat us down and were like, you have to apply for this. You guys are exactly what we're talking about. What you're doing is what we're wanting to see happen. And so on September 11th, in the middle of COVID, we were designated an Envision Center. We did a grand opening with HUD virtually. And so we now communicate with them on a regular basis. If there's funding or additional resources that are available, they're making sure that we know what's happening so that we can bring together multiple funding sources in order to provide the best services and resources to our citizens.
So that was September 11th of which year?
Of 2020.
2020.
So we've been in that more than a year.
Cycle.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And so it's great to have that connection too, to where it's, we saw this grant is coming up, do we fit the mold? And they know who we are, and or they're sending us stuff like, please apply for this grant. What you guys do matches what this is. So it is just a great channel of communication in order to see what's happening at our federal level, and just also to make sure that, we're held accountable and that we are seeing what's going on with others, so it creates a connection, and we can see what other organizations are doing to implement better practices here.
Because this is nationwide, this concept of Envision Centers.
Correct.
I hope that continues to grow around the country. And
yeah, so I think there's about 55 of them. Mm-hmm. Not all of them are a building that's been saved and renovated. Right. Some of them are just something like, if we think about our Jordan Valley, that's mostly health-based, but they also do a lot of other resources. So they have the health and the wellness, and if they added components that were like economic development, so it was more of a one-stop shop, then, they potentially could apply for it. But their focus right now is health and wellness, and so it's how do you add those other things to truly be a one-stop shop?
I'm going to take it back just a little bit. I'm curious, when you started this, you had to create a mission, right?
Yes.
So that you would have a mission helps you drive your business. And it gets everybody on the same page, understanding what the direction is. So what was the mission that you created?
Right. So our mission developed over a couple of years of figuring out what are we really. And so I have a great board. We've done several strategic plans in order to create this. And so the mission that we have is we educate, empower, and support underserved families through personalized programs and coaching to increase the quality of life and build resilient communities. Mm-hmm. So it's a mouthful, but it really defines what we do.
Yeah, it does, and it's perfect. I've seen some mission statements this long, but that's perfect.
Yes.
And I love the resilient communities, because
yes.
it's not like you're trying to make anything perfect.
Right.
You're trying to help people be stronger.
Yes. And we really want the idea of what I don't want is to work with a family in this community, specifically like Grant Beach or the neighborhoods around the north side, and their greatest wish is, I want to become financially stable and self-sufficient so I can get the heck out of this neighborhood. Mm-hmm. So the idea is, how do we look at Springfield as a whole, or any city as a whole, mm-hmm. and identify areas that we can build and redevelop in neighborhoods that are maybe run down, and create community and walkability and the things that individuals want and thrive in order to continue to have blended communities. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's so much research on what is the most successful thing that creates a city that is fully functioning, and that blended living, to where I know that my neighbor is lower income than I am. Mm-hmm. And I know that he sometimes struggles. So every Thursday when we do food distribution, I take food and I put the food on his front porch. Yeah. And I just send him a message and say, hey, it's there. And if a tree fell, mm-hmm. and he couldn't afford to have he did what he could afford. He couldn't afford the ending of it. And I was having some work done, and I was like, hey, I'm going to haul the rest of that stuff mm-hmm. off for you. Because I care what his front yard looks like, because it affects my view, it affects my front yard, but I also know that I have the capacity to do it and he doesn't. And I'm going to help take care of him because my neighborhood matters to me.
Right.
And I don't know how we've lost that.
It's, and that's what, when you were saying that, that resonated with me because it's about the humanity, right? It's not seeing the property or making sure nobody embarrasses you. It's seeing the humanity. And that's what we're losing and we need to reclaim.
Yes. Yeah.
And seeing that if somebody needs their gutters cleaned because they don't have a ladder,
Right.
loan them the ladder or help them clean their gutters.
Yeah.
And not stand there in a place of, what's the matter with you? And why can't you do X, Y, and Z?
Right.
So
yeah.
I think,
my neighbor has a story, right? I mean,
Right.
It's not like he chooses to not be able to take care of those things. And I think that's, it's easier for us to just get into this mindset of, well, you're making bad choices. You choose to do these dumb things without being like, man, what must be going on? How much you must be struggling to not be able to afford the ladder or, be able to afford food. And it's just easier to not carry that burden. So it's easier to tell the story of they must be doing something wrong and they deserve that.
there's people that I've met that are members up here. To look at them, they look physically capable and healthy, but then you talk to them and you understand that there is a story behind that. And as we talked about the facade with a building, you may see a building that looks gorgeous. You take down that facade and there's problems underneath that you can repair and fix with time. There's a lot to it. We can go into so many more ideas.
Yes.
And you notice, you had said before, flattery, the best form of flattery is to have other people replicate your idea. And it would be remarkable if there were other, maybe not called Drew Lewis, but that whole concept. Have you ever thought about helping spread this concept to other communities?
Absolutely. So there are other organizations and other communities that are doing this. When the Dream Center started here in Springfield, Jody, who was leading that, reached out and said, I don't want you mad at me thinking that we're stealing your thunder, if you will. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, I wish there were 10 of these. There's another school that's closing down. Like, hopefully that'll happen. And we do have the O'Reilly Center for Hope. This is not an Amy thing, and you're going to, step on my toes. Like, my whole thing is, how do I help more individuals do this? There's an amazing one that's in El Dorado Springs, tiny little town called the Liston Center, where they took their school and are doing a version of this. And so they have GED classes there. They've done all kinds of things, cooking classes and that sort, in order to repurpose a school. They're fighting the concept of sustainability, though. So how do we keep the lights on? How do we pay the utilities? Old buildings have maintenance bills. And so it really is looking at, we have to have the idea of community. We have to have the idea of investment.
Right.
And so that's the biggest thing, is looking at how do you tell the story so that community members realize investing in this, investing actual dollars in upstream solutions in the long term is the most effective way to change what's happening downstream. And so we have that conversation a lot on people need emergent needs. They need the basics of housing and clothes and food in order to make more, wiser choices when your brain, that bandwidth isn't consumed by just your basic needs. Right. And so we've got to invest in upstream solutions. And that's really what Envision Centers are. That's what these types of community hubs are, is that we've got to come together as a community and invest our dollars here in our home front in order to really change the capacity of all of the citizens in Springfield. We were awarded funds from the state. So we have been, and it's something I was very proud of, that we have been privately funded. So through foundations and grants and dollars from the very beginning. So when someone would say, oh, you're using tax dollars to blah, blah, it's like, no, This is our community investing in our citizens. Well, when I proudly, went to the federal government and was making that statement, it was like, well, what about federal dollars? What about state dollars? What about tax dollars being reinvested in your community? Like that's a reinvestment too. And so it's taking me, and it's taken the idea of messaging, because if we say, hey, we've received state funding for this year, then we might have another funder who says, well, they received thousands of dollars, they don't need my money. Right. And so that message is really difficult to play with on, we were able to secure state tax dollars that would have gone to another county, that would have gone to another city. We are doing great work, and it's recognized in the state, and we got tax dollars brought back to our county, back to our city. And so for that idea of reinvestment in community is important, and realizing that now that we have those funds, how do we leverage those funds to say, hey, we do have those funds, and they're going to create stability this year, but there's so much more we need to be doing. There's more hubs we need to be creating. We're expanding into other rural communities. The most expensive part is human capital, and we need amazing humans employed by Drew Lewis Foundation in order to do more of what we do.
And you said you're expanding into other communities. So what other communities are you looking at?
So we have groups that are currently going in Aurora, Salem, Monette. We've also the Dream Center, even though they're in Springfield, they are doing their own classes as well. So we train the trainer. And then we also have, we've trained in Eldon, Herman, El Dorado Springs, Neosho. We're really looking at these different rural communities throughout Missouri. And then we've even started conversations with a city in Colorado. So it's not just Missouri, even though our Missouri dollars will be spent on Missouri families. We are getting some national recognition and organizations that are saying we've kind of tried something like that, but it didn't have the year-long or the 2-year-long programming. So, tell us what you do and why it's effective.
Yeah, I love that, because you can take, it's not the dollars so much that you would take, it's the knowledge, so that they can get their own tax dollars from their community to reinvest. And I think what people have to understand more than anything, it goes beyond the dollar sign, right? It goes to the people, because if we can reinvest and build lives, then the whole concept of humanity is elevated, and those individuals then feel that they're worthy of an education, that they are then worthy of a better job. And it starts to snowball, and then all of a sudden they can afford a car, and they're spending dollars in our community, and they're creating sales tax, and then they go to work and they are creating revenues for the community with the work that they do, and then they can go buy things and invest in things and have their kids educated and pay real estate taxes so that our schools have more funding. So it snowballs.
Absolutely.
This is a perfect example of the hand up and not the hand out.
Yeah.
And I love that you're trying to spread that to other states, not just communities in Missouri.
Yeah. And those both are so important, is that we have to have, and that's the other difficult conversation, is we do have to have the handout for individuals that for whatever reason have, they're rock bottom, and without those resources, even the suit they need to go to the job interview, without those, we can't do what we do. And so, we've got to have those in place, and then we've got to have great case management and coaching and personalized programs that then move individuals into more stable conditions, and then, like you said, contribute back into our community.
Yeah, I like that you've started, so I get to be a part of the coaching program here, and what I like about that is we are working to build up people's sense of self and help them understand that they're more than just their circumstances, and to help keep them moving forward step by step. We mentioned in our first podcast, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right? So it's guiding people one step at a time. And like you said, whether that's providing a suit so that they can go to a job interview, produce boxes on certain nights of the week so they can have some type of nourishment through the week. but it's the whole process of holding people's hands through everything and making sure that they know somebody has their back for the first time, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that support system, right? We all have that support system, or we assume we all have that support system. And many of the families you're now working with and that our staff work with, we've learned that most of those support systems are often toxic because they also are in difficult situations. And so there's just a lot of that that becomes a difficult thing to work through.
Right. We're working to change that story. So as children of these families grow up, they're seeing their parents find solutions to poverty and how to move out of those same repetitive stories that the family has passed down for generation. And now these kids are saying, my mom and dad are working hard. They are providing a home for us. You know, they are moving forward, and I can too, and I can go to college, and I can get my education, or go to technical, you know, the technical aspect. But they see more than I'm stuck and I'm never going to be more than the sum of my parts.
Generational poverty, for sure. Yeah. And so, those are the things that we look at and that we really work through with our mission here at Drew Lewis Foundation. And it's one of those that, we're really looking at the idea of how do we expand? There's such an important question that you asked. How do we expand? And it really is through local investments. We've had amazing investors through a housing program that we started, the Blue House Project. And so with that, we've purchased 10 houses that are in Grant Beach. One time I had read, I cannot find this article, so if any of our listeners know what this is, I've searched and searched to find it again, but it's something that actually drives part of what I do, and I don't even know what the resource is. But
maybe you dreamt it.
Yeah, maybe I did. But it was about how a program had focused on changing 10 houses within a 10-block radius. So they were a hub, and it was 5 blocks one way or another. Well, that's really how the Fairbanks sits in Grant Beach. We're kind of in the middle. It's 5 blocks south, east, west. And so we started out with one house. And this idea was, okay, can we affect 10 houses? And then what does that have to do with this neighborhood? And, how do we begin to see the change in this community through the broken window kind of theory and policy? So we ended up with donations and loans in combination with Tom Carlson, who's mayor of Springfield twice. He's really into housing through HUD and other resources. And he came alongside us and believed in it and was like, okay, let's start with one. And now we own multiple houses through our partnership with him. We have David and Stacey O'Reilly, who have, in essence, adopted a house. So they're focusing on one home that's right across the street from the Fairbanks. And then Oak Star Bank and Central Bank are doing CRA programs with us. So they invest in the houses. And then when we sell the house, we pay those back. And then we also work with the SBA, the Small Business Association, to have a low interest loan that's specific for housing as well. So I guess I'm innovative in the different ways that we can cobble together funding in order to make nonprofits, those resources work. But that's really what it takes in the nonprofit world in order to find something that works, and then really ask for others to join, for others to see that value in saving our housing stock. Springfield's biggest complaint right now is safe, quality, affordable housing. And this neighborhood is unfortunately full of old homes that have not been maintained or renovated over the last 20, 40, 100 years. And so being able to repurpose a house and not only just change the facade of the street, but then to put a family in it and recreate warmth and love and all the things that go into what a home means is another amazing part that we can probably fill a whole nother podcast about what that program is and really how that,
because there's one across the street that it's the cutest house. You put that at the beach and it is a $2 million, $3 million property. But it's adorable. But as far as creating more investment dollars, if you had your wish list, how would you go about getting more dollars for your programs? Is it through CRA?
CRA is great because banks are often having difficulty, especially in the economic development aspect of finding opportunities to invest. And what's amazing about working with banks is that it also gives us the opportunity to educate bankers on the other side. And so you want to, obviously the bank's ultimate goal would be that the family that moves into that house also gets the loan through them. But then that means they have to understand a low to moderate, but really a low income homeowner. And what does that look like? Central Bank and Multiply Bank have been doing amazing work by making sure that they have staff who have empathy and can understand what this potential buyer is going through. And they are building customers. I mean, what do banks want? They want customers. And what do we have? You know, in our community, we have a lot of low to moderate-ish income earners. They're earning income, but it's a low income. And if you can't work with individuals to create bankability, then you're missing out on nearly 50% of your customers just in our city. And so it's, CRA is amazing and being able to do that. But really getting local individuals to invest in homes. We can do some that are in the form of a loan where it can be paid back. We need that front capital. But of course, just being able to take dollars and reinvest. What's amazing about that is in the world of real estate, if you invest, then we can sell the house. And typically we can renovate for less than what the sale price of the house is going to be. And so any money that we make on a sale is going to roll right into the next house. And so getting that initial it's like anyone who, gets into real estate, it takes that initial investment and one develops the next and develops the next. And all of a sudden, you have an empire. But for us, our empire is we want to affect the houses and get homeowners in them. We don't want to own them.
So what would be a typical investment amount that would be helpful?
Most of our investments are close to the $100,000 value. So it's for us to buy a home and renovate it in this neighborhood, it's going to take about $80,000 to $100,000. Yeah.
That's a very good, helpful number. I think that if people understood it's not some massive six figures, but it's a very doable.
I mean, we would take that too.
Yeah. Yes,
we really changed the face of this community.
Yeah, no joke. But every dollar counts, and that's going to just create more dollars for the community.
Absolutely.
So what has this project meant to you, and how do you think it would have been different had Drew been able to be a part of it?
Oh, that's a whole nother podcast.
Okay.
Yeah, no.
Well,
so, right, I mean, the
That
Fairbanks,
was
the
deep.
Blue House Project, all of that has really been my therapy and a way to expend energy that otherwise would have been in, I don't know, more of the ways we think of grief and in sorrow and in just, the difficulty that it is to go through the loss of someone.
Yeah.
This was a much healthier way to do it for me. It was a better way to manage grief, as if there is a best way to manage grief. And so for sure, in our next episode, I'd love to discuss the passion that it took, even though there was the story behind this, the loss that I don't know that it would have been the same if Drew had lived. And that's tragic to say and to feel, of like, did it take Drew passing for it to be this big? And what a horrible thing to have to think and feel.
Yeah, I
like
get
it's awful. Yeah. The same, what if Jeff had lived? How would that be different for your business and for you and your kids? And, the one day we're both going to have to figure out how our daughters walk down the aisle.
Well, I'm going to be walking down the aisle with my daughter. She's getting married next year, and I'm going to be right there next to her. So.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, how does loss, shape our lives? How does it change what we're doing today? But yeah, we'll definitely talk about the what if game and what that might have looked like and what I think things might have done. I think I would have been very different in a way that I might not be as proud of, because we would have been very affluent.
Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah.
And who knows, at the time when Jeff passed, it was 2008 when the market was going crazy town, and as financial advisors, who knows? But that's to be.
Yeah. We can what if that all over and over. But no, I mean, we could, it's definitely a conversation about how being trauma informed shapes who I am and how I see others. And then just also the idea of being trauma informed. It is very important, especially as we're seeing so many individuals throughout our country that are experiencing trauma as a result of low income. And so, yeah, we're gonna, next podcast, we'll be talking a little bit more about Drew Lewis Foundation, where we might have been, where we're headed, and we'll dig into the Blue House Project a little bit more, as well as discussing how being trauma informed can help shape your future and the future of our community.
Yeah, agreed. Sounds wonderful. Look at the good part behind the facade, right? All of the strength and beauty, and keep it moving forward. So.
Absolutely. Well, we thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to discussing more about the Drew Lewis Foundation and the resources we provide in our community.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Enrichment Today podcast. If you liked this episode, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And visit our websites enrichmenttoday.org and drewlewis.org. Until next time, remember to break some crayons.